This video is brought to you by Gamefly.com. I rely on Gamefly for many of the console copies of games I test on the Potato Masher. You can rent 8,000 new releases and classics on most major systems, all delivered right to your mailbox. If you use this URL to sign up for a free 30-day trial, you can test out their service and help support my channel. The link is in the description, so go check it out. Today, we'll be taking a look at Gears of War 4 on the Xbox One and the Potato Masher. If you don't know, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its life cycle, except when it competes against the Xbox One, like today. Guys, the Potato Masher is almost 2 years old. That's pretty cool. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. There's more info in the description, so let's get to it. Who's ready for some disclaimers? First, I did play Gears of War on the PC many years ago, but I haven't really kept up with the series, so I don't know the ins and outs of each game mode. As a result, I do most of the graphics comparisons using the single-player campaign where I can more easily match up footage, but I have recorded plenty of multiplayer footage for various sections. The second disclaimer is that as a universal Windows program, Gears of War does not allow me to use MSI Afterburner to monitor performance like I normally do. Fortunately, like Forza Horizon 3, it does come with a built-in FPS counter, although Gears counter does have more information available if you want it, which I do, and it's in the lower right-hand corner of the screen if you want to check it out. I don't know Gears gameplay well enough to participate in the current debate on the forums about the level of microtransactions in the game. I followed the technical side much more closely, and people's opinions seem largely positive. The game does have one of the most robust graphics option menus in any recent PC game, and the built-in benchmarking tool is brilliant. While it can be viewed as a simple pass-fail test for people who want to test the in-game presets and then hop right into a few matches, it has a lot of information and depth for gamers who enjoy tinkering to get the best possible visuals out of their machines. It can even tell you if your frame rate is GPU bound or CPU bound, so you know where you might have a bottleneck in your system. While the high preset ran fine, I spent some time digging through the menus and using the benchmarking tool. After a few minutes, I was able to lock in great performance with quite a few options turned up to Ultra. This screen shows all but a couple of them that for some reason aren't here, and those were set to high just to avoid confusion. You will, however, notice that the texture settings are turned down to medium. This is because of the only bug I've encountered in the game so far. The GTX 760 in the Masher does have 2GB of VRAM, but the game reports 1.67GB as being available to use in the overlay. Windows does normally reserve some of your VRAM, but as long as your total VRAM usage stays under or near the amount you have available, textures are able to be swapped in and out of VRAM fast enough that there are usually no issues in most games. However, in Gears, unless I keep the total usage below about 1.7GB, verified by MSI Afterburner monitoring the desktop, Gears does not always correctly load the high character textures. At times they look blurry and fairly disappointing, and at times they look totally fine. There's no stutter or hitching or crashes or any other issues, so hopefully this is just a texture swap error and it can be fixed in a patch. Overall, this is a very minor issue, as all I have to do is lower the textures to medium, take a small visual hit, and everything is then fine, albeit with slightly worse textures that correctly load every time. At a mixture of high, ultra, and a few medium settings, which I'll be referring to as high on my scale, the Masher plays the campaign at 30 FPS and 1080p with no drops whatsoever at any point. The Xbox One also has very stable performance, which it achieves with the help of occasional dynamic resolution scaling. You all know I'm a fan of resolution scaling, but Gears of War 4 is the first game I'm aware of that gives PC players the option to scale the game's internal resolution dynamically, instead of picking a preset amount, although that's an option as well. There's a sharpening filter that helps compensate for momentary resolution drops, and you can even adjust how strong that is. All in all, it's very impressive, and I hope more PC games start implementing this. Now, I'm not using that feature in this section, but we'll talk about that more in a minute. The Xbox One version of the game does look very good and in many ways is comparable to the PC settings I'm using on the Masher. The Masher does have a little more polish in a few areas, which leads me to think that the Xbox One is using close to the high preset across the board, of course with a little more customization. You will notice that the Xbox One appears to be using high textures, and they do look better than the textures on the Masher. Anisotropic filtering is good across both platforms, so that can't account for the visual differences you see here. Dropping to medium textures does hurt the PC image in these comparisons. The Masher does have slightly better bloom lighting, softer shadows, and better atmospheric lighting effects, but these are more noticeable in comparisons, not gameplay. It's great that those high-end features are present, but the visual differences between high and very high settings are not very large. The Masher's biggest improvement over the Xbox is in ambient occlusion. The Xbox has much lower, almost non-existent ambient occlusion, which does result in objects looking less grounded by natural light fall off and shadows. In multiplayer, the Xbox runs at 60 FPS, again with dynamic resolution scaling helping it keep that frame rate steady. The Masher doesn't need any changes made to the visuals to hit a lock 60, except moving the frame rate cap up to 60 from 30 where I had it for the campaign. Both versions have the same differences present in the single-player campaign, just on smaller maps and with fewer enemies to allow the higher frame rates. So, during normal gameplay, what does this all mean? Well, despite some large ambient occlusion advantages for the PC, and the fact that it's running at native 1080p, and then of course the texture advantages for the Xbox One, the visual experience is much more alike than it's different. Gears is being held up by many people as an example of amazing optimization. While it's a very solid port and a much better representative for the Xbox Play Anywhere program than Forza Horizon 3's port, I'm not seeing any optimization miracles here. The game looks good, but in my opinion it's not amazing. It doesn't break through any visual barriers or show you just what's possible on cutting-edge hardware, it just looks good. It does have some very impressive sections with flying debris and dramatic lighting, so don't misunderstand me. The overall presentation is very good, and there are plenty of visual treats for people gaming on both systems. I care a lot about both ambient occlusion and sharp textures, so I can't really pick a winner between the two platforms just based on the visuals at 1080p and 30 FPS. However, we're not done yet. Gaming on a PC is primarily about being able to choose what type of experience you want to have, and that of course fits in your budget. If you're okay lowering your visuals slightly to hit 60 FPS or more, reducing stutter and input lag, then games feel more responsive and smooth. Here is where dynamic resolution scaling comes in on the Masher. Dropping the graphics to medium isn't enough to hit a locked 60 FPS all the time, and rather than compromise the visuals further, I turned on 25% dynamic resolution downscaling. This means that the game renders at a full 1080p whenever it can maintain 60 FPS, and it lowers that resolution up to 25% when it needs to. You can tweak the exact amount you want the game to downscale when necessary, so some people may only need 5 or 10% dynamic downscaling to lock their frame rates. It's a great feature that can take some of the guesswork out of tweaking settings. The resolution downscaling is noticeable if you're standing still, of course, but I was surprised how little I noticed it during combat, which is true on the Xbox One as well. High settings and 30 FPS is on the left, and medium settings and 60 FPS is on the right. You can see a visual difference, but it comes as much from dropping the preset down to medium as it does from the resolution change. When standing still, you will notice a checkerboard pattern in reflections and some distant objects, which is also noticeable on the Xbox One when it's downscaling. That's a little distracting on both systems, but again, it's less noticeable during normal gameplay, and the advantages of 60 FPS may more than make up for that for some people who really don't like 30 FPS. Now, 30 FPS on these systems do look really good, the motion blur is excellent, but 30 FPS for some people is still just 30 FPS. I wouldn't want to drop below medium settings for most of the visual settings personally, as the game starts looking decidedly dated and the frame rate bump starts feeling less worth it. Jacking the field of view up to 100, uncapping the frame rate, and finally playing with a mouse, multiplayer becomes a different experience altogether. The FPS stayed between 90 and 120, so the lowered input lag coupled with a G-Sync monitor would feel really great for this game. Even on a 60Hz monitor, the reduction in input lag is very noticeable, and if I were serious about multiplayer for this game, or even decent at it, this is probably how I'd play. I did drop the dynamic resolution scaling down to 50% to see if I could coax a few more frames out of the Masher, but it topped out around 130 FPS and it looked really bad, so I turned that back up. .1080p is fine and all, but if you want to see the beauty of a game closer to how the artists and developers created it, a high-resolution monitor could be just the ticket, or you could always super sample the resolution on a 1080p monitor. A budget PC like the Potato Masher will seldom be able to game at 4K, but it can handle quite a few games at 1440p and reasonably playable settings. At medium settings with up to 25% dynamic resolution scaling, the game ran well at 30 FPS even in the midst of frenetic action. The bump in clarity is nice, and it does look like the resolution stays close to native 1440p most of the time. When drops do happen, the higher base resolution helps to keep that from being as noticeable, and the game looks great. However, multiplayer didn't quite hit 60 FPS, so I probably wouldn't want to drop the resolution scaling or the settings further to lock at 60 unless I was actually using a native 1440p monitor. 40 to 50 FPS in a competitive multiplayer game is pretty rough, especially when you're not good at it. At first look, the two platforms aren't all that different. They trade blows visually, and with the Xbox Play Anywhere program, progress syncs perfectly between them. And of course, I only had to buy the game once, which I always like when I'm doing these comparisons. The PC does have an additional advantage in that you don't have to pay for Xbox Live to game with your friends, and this is a primarily multiplayer game for most of the community, but otherwise the regular experiences are similar. However, the Master is capable of compromising the visuals slightly to hit 60 FPS or 1440p depending on your preferences. PC gaming is all about choice, and Gears of War 4 is the type of excellent port that lets you tweak whatever you need to customize the experience to be right for you. Because of this, the Master is the better experience in my opinion. Of course, I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, check out the original build video or any of the other Potato Master videos linked on screen. This project was started by the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast, so click the link to check us out. You can support this channel and the Potato Master project by tossing me a few bucks on Patreon or checking out Gamefly using the link in the description. It helps me test new games quicker and better, and the Potato Master Pro is coming soon. Thank you for your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.